Welcome to the LearnSkin podcast with Dr. Raja and Dr. Hadar, where they discuss all things skin. Skin is fascinating because it affects us in so many ways, like our health, psychology, and how we connect with those around us. This podcast delves into the art and science of skincare. A short disclaimer before we get to the good stuff. Dr. Raja Sivamani and Dr. Hadar Levtov are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only. All opinions shared do not express the views of LearnSkin. Neither this podcast nor any information contained within it are a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. This podcast does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services.
Hey Raja, how are you today?
Hey Hadar, it's going to be another great podcast. I'm really excited about this one.
I'm all pumped up. You can say my sugar is through the ears.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. We're very lucky. Today we have Dr. Kimber Stanhope. She's a Research Nutritional Biologist at UC Davis, which is a powerhouse when it comes to agricultural and food-based research. And she's in the Department of Molecular Biosciences. And we're particularly lucky because not only is she a research scientist, she's also an trained RD. So she really gets both sides of the coin. And I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. So I wanted to start off by asking you a question that's been on the top of my mind for a long time. We've been talking about glycemic index and high glycemic foods and low glycemic diets. In dermatology, we really get into this when we start thinking about diseases like acne, or hidradenitis suppurativa, or even when we think about how to manage weight with diseases like psoriasis. So can you really paint for us, what is the difference between different sugars like glucose and fructose and sucrose? Can you walk us through that?
Sure. And as I answer, I also am going to walk you through the foods in the context of glycemic index too.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. That'd be great.
Yes, food. We like food.
Okay, yeah. We'll start with, when it comes to a glycemic response, the food that's the worst possible to drink. And it's actually food that I give my human subjects a lot as a comparative group. And that's someone who's drinking glucose-sweetened beverage. Okay, nothing will raise your glucose faster or higher than a liquid that has nothing in it but glucose. And that's not exactly a big surprise. Glucose in the drink goes straight through to the stomach, small intestine, and directly into the portal vein and gets distributed all over the body. So blood glucose goes up faster with glucose in a liquid form than any other food. The next fastest would probably be glucose in a solid food. Let's say I gave you glucose cubes, pure crystalline glucose as a cube. That would also cause your blood glucose to go up very fast, but not as fast as the liquid. Liquids can just really speed compared to a solid food. The third item, though, that would probably cause your glucose to go up in third place would be, let's say, one of our sugars, like high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is anywhere from 45 to 50, sometimes 60% glucose, free glucose molecules that, again, especially if they're in a drink, will go straight to your stomach, intestine, portal vein, and that portal vein will send it the glucose in the high fructose corn syrup all over the body. And so those are all simple sugars in which the glucose is not attached to anything. So it can go in very quickly. Okay, fourth place then would be sucrose. Now, sucrose is sugar, but it's a disaccharide. It's one glucose molecule attached to a fructose molecule. It's going to take a little bit longer for the sucrose to be broken down in the intestine and then to send the glucose out into the blood to raise the blood glucose. So that's why we're calling sucrose in fourth place behind high fructose corn syrup, where the glucose is not attached to anything and therefore can exit the intestine far more quickly. Now we can start talking about the foods that we consume in solid foods. There is free glucose in, and also sucrose in fruits, but those are not going to raise your blood glucose nearly as fast as a sugar-sweetened beverage, because those fruits also contain fiber and a lot of other plant foods that are going to slow down the process. Also, it takes an awful lot of fruit to get as much sugar as we can put in a 12-ounce soda can. Therefore, fruit does have the glucose. It can raise your blood glucose, and somebody with diabetes does need to be careful about how much fruit they consume. But for a normal, healthy person, eating a piece of fruit is not going to raise your blood glucose off the roof.
So simply put, having the actual orange is probably a better choice than just drinking orange juice?
I would say that's probably definitely true.
Right.
I have never...
All right, I'm keeping up.
But he actually done the study where they did the post-meal glucose responses and gave isocaloric amounts of orange versus orange juice. But my bet would be for sure on the orange juice causing higher glucose peaks than the orange. And I would say that for apples versus apple juice, plums versus plum juice, all of
right.
them. The more fiber you have in a food, the more it's going to slow down the process.
Now, Kimber,
go ahead.
Oh, one question that I have is, you've been speaking about glucose quite a bit, and you touched upon fructose. Are they metabolically the same, or are there differences metabolically in how they're broken down, and does that have implications for how that affects your glucose spikes?
Absolutely. It's very, very different. I already said glucose leaves the intestine through the portal vein. The very next bus stop on the portal vein is the liver, okay? And the liver can make the decision whether it wants to use the sugar in your blood versus let it go by and let the rest of the body have it. Now, in the case of glucose, that decision is controlled by the rate-limiting enzyme called PFK. And PFK makes the decision based on whether the liver needs energy or not. So liver that's well stocked with energy, PFK says, nope, we don't need it. It turns off, and all the glucose, nearly all the glucose, goes to the body. And the brain, the muscle, the fat cells, the nerve cells, all that glucose is available for the rest of the body to use. So in a way, glucose getting delivered to the rest of the body is a good thing because the body can use it, right? Now, the opposite is happening with fructose. Fructose also leaves the intestine via the portal vein, But when it gets to the liver, a completely different enzyme is controlling the decision. This enzyme's called fructokinase, and this enzyme does not pay any attention to whether the liver needs energy or not. It is basically turned on all the time. And so the fructose, as it arrives at the liver, is shuttled and immediately metabolized by fructokinase down the glycolytic pathway. And what this does is it pretty much keeps all the fructose, let's say in that soda you just drank, 90% of that fructose is ending up in the liver. And what that causes is an overload of fructose. And the liver does the best job it can utilizing this overload. It turns some of the fructose into glucose and stores it as glycogen. It turns some of the fructose into lactate and sends it out in the blood. It turns some of that fructose into energy, but anything it can't deal with by those pathways, it starts turning into fat. And that is what our studies, our carefully controlled studies, have shown, that when we overfeed subjects glucose, it raises their blood glucose levels. But when we overfeed our subjects fructose, it increases fat making in the liver. And with that increased fat making, you get more triglyceride being sent out into the blood and more cholesterol being sent out into the blood. And those are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. But at the same time, some of that fat that's been made from the fructose stays in the liver. That increases the liver fat content, which is a risk factor for diabetes. And, we have basically a new epidemic going on that was completely non-existent 20 years ago. Our children are getting fatty liver. And it's something that is just overwhelming the liver doctors. It's amazingly shocking to them that they are running into children with fatty liver. That used to be considered an older person's disease or an alcoholic disease.
Right.
Kimber,
children.
Kimber, this really raises some questions for me. First of all, in psoriasis, we see a lot of folks that deal with fatty liver, and it's making me think about, dietary choices. What are the sources of fructose? What are the common sources of fructose in foods today? And can you differentiate that from high fructose corn syrup? I know you talked about that very briefly in the beginning, but where do you get fructose, and then where do you get high fructose corn syrup?
Mainly the people who are on high fructose diets are getting it from sodas and the added sugars in solid foods. And so in the sodas, it could be a soda sweetened with high fructose corn syrup, or it could be a soda sweetened with sucrose. The sucrose is always 50% fructose. The high fructose corn syrup can be anywhere in your soda, can be anywhere from 55 to 65% fructose. But those are the main contributors, but also the fructose in a cookie, the fructose in the cakes, the candy, the pastries, the ice cream. All of those are contributing too. And so basically, our guidelines say we shouldn't be consuming any more than 10% of our calories as added sugar. Whether that's actually low enough or not, the studies haven't been done to prove that, but my belief is that the average person is consuming at least 15% of their calories from added sugar, and possibly even more. And it's the younger children and adolescents and teenagers who are consuming the most. So, but in my mind, it really doesn't matter whether it's sucrose or a high fructose corn syrup, they're both contributing.
Thank you. That was really informative. And I think we are facing, as doctors every day in clinic, these patients who come in with fatty liver that are younger and younger. Even in dermatology, we see it as a past medical history, so to speak, but it certainly affects sometimes our choice of medication, et cetera. So I think it's very important to understand that this can happen at younger ages because we see patients throughout the lifespan. I wanted to ask you about these sugars and what can we actually do then? Because we like sweet foods. And so the industry has come up with substitutes. Can you talk about those and how they may be beneficial in a diet?
Well, the substitutes, for example, aspartame, and that's the one that's been studied the most. They are getting very bad reputations, but the truth is, for specifically aspartame, the scientific data has not found any negative health effects of consuming aspartame in human subjects. I actually use aspartame as the control drink for many of my studies, and it's so consistent. The sucrose and the high fructose corn syrup and the fructose and a little tiny bit glucose all cause adverse effects that I have yet to have seen a single negative health effect of consuming aspartame. And so to me, it is a little bit distressing that the bad press that aspartame gets has actually caused the decline in aspartame or diet soda consumption has gone down faster than sugar sweetened beverage consumption. It actually is, great news that we are now consuming less soda than we did 10 years ago. And, hopefully I get to say my data helped that trend. But at the same time, it is bothersome to me that the decrease in consumption for aspartame is even greater. And I think that's more related to bad press, and it's definitely not related to the scientific evidence. Now, I say that, but at the same time, does that mean I think anybody should drink aspartame instead of water? No. Drink water. Water is always the best.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. But for somebody that is truly attached and can't live with the thought of not having their sweet, carbonated soda, when somebody like that asks me, well, I heard the diet sodas are even worse, so I don't drink those, I say, please drink those. Drink an aspartame sweetened soda. It's a better choice any day compared to the sugar sweetened soda, whether it's sucrose sweetened or high fructose corn syrup sweetened. So I definitely do believe that about aspartame, but at the same time, aspartame has been studied 4 or 5 or 6 times more than any of the other artificial sweeteners. In fact, just last month, a paper came out. Well, it was actually, in May, a paper got published from Richard Mattis where he reported when he did a 12-week study comparing sucrose aspartame, stevia, saccharin, and did I say sucralose? Sucralose? Oh,
Yeah.
stevia. Anyway, saccharin caused weight gain. Not as much as sucrose did, but it was still a significant increase. And so I would probably not go hunt myself down a soda that contains saccharin. That's the first study that we've seen any effect of the artificial sweeteners to increase body weight gain.
Now, Kimber, when you're talking about these artificial sweeteners, can you just explain, what is the brand name for each of these, and, what is saccharin known as, what is stevia known as, just so that people can wrap their head around it practically?
Sure. It's, how they come in those little packets, and often there's three on the table, all three kinds on the table. Well, yes. The equal packet is aspartame. The Splenda package is sucralose, and the sweet and low is saccharin. Now, stevia will probably say stevia on it, and that's the newer one. So I haven't seen as many packages on the table of stevia, but there is Truvia. And Truvia you can actually buy and cook with it, but it's the bulk sweetener in Truvia isn't stevia. It contains a little tiny bit of stevia to make it super sweet as they want it to be, but the other sweetener is a sugar alcohol called erythritol, and that's the one that's actually in the crystalline form and gives it the bulk and allows it to be almost used as a one-for-one exchange as sucrose.
Now, Kimber, when we're thinking about these artificial sweeteners, I know you alluded to them, but is there any one of those that are linked to things like weight gain? I know you mentioned aspartame is not. Are any of the other ones linked to weight gain or linked to negative effects in the body?
Saccharin is the one that a researcher who I totally trust reported that it did cause about 1 kilogram of body weight gain over a 12-week study. Okay, so that would be my first choice as the one to avoid. Saccharin has also been the one that has been implicated as having effects on the microbiota in our guts, meaning all the microbes down there, and that these effects were not good and they caused glucose intolerance. That study needs to be confirmed to see if that is actually a real effect, but that's reason number 2, maybe to avoid saccharin. But like I said, I really am fairly confident that aspartame is safe. Now, is aspartame safe at a level of 4 aspartame sweetened sodas a day for 20 years? I don't know for sure, and we'll never know for sure because no one will ever be able to do a study like that. There's not enough money and not enough time. So again, right. Don't push it. Learn to like water.
Right. I think you summarized it beautifully, because the first choice should always be water. And really, I want to reframe this as you did in the beginning, that our discussion really points to the people who are actually making that choice to say, okay, I need that sweetened soda today, or maybe some other food that may contain one of those sugars or sugar substitutes that you mentioned. And I think it was very useful, because now I can wrap my mind around why these things may have the effect that they do. And thank you also for mentioning the microbiome, because we are learning more and more about that, both the gut microbiome, the skin microbiome, and the connection between them. And that's certainly one of the things we'll be discussing in our integrative dermatology symposium that's coming up. So perhaps you can leave us with, as a last thought, with a pearl that we can take to our daily life, be it as a physician or as a patient or a person with any skin disease. What kind of choices should we make when it comes to sugars?
Okay. First of all, think about the two things we've just talked about, how fructose causes this overload in the liver that leads to fat making, fatty liver, and triglycerides in the blood. Very bad thing. But glucose causes these huge increases in glucose levels and insulin levels, and they have been tied over the long term to negative health effects. Now, the sugars we eat, sucrose and high fructose corn syrup, they're made of both of these things. So we have two problematic effects happening in our body every single time we eat sugar. And the other bad thing about sugar, it's completely without nutrients. Most of our sugar-containing foods are completely void or very low in nutrients. So here is 3 reasons to try and limit your sugar consumption. Fat overload in the liver, high blood glucose levels and insulin levels, and this is not nutritious food. And then, for a subject we haven't even talked about, it may also promote body weight gain. And that might be another podcast.
Absolutely. And what a wonderful place to stop here, because I think what you mentioned about rise in triglyceride and weight gain, as well as spikes in insulin, all these have been linked to skin disease, be it psoriasis, acne, hidradenitis, and the list goes on. So this is very relevant to our daily practice, and I truly appreciate you taking the time to guide us through this today. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the LearnSkin podcast with Dr. Raja and Dr. Hadar. We would like to take this moment to tell you about our upcoming 2nd Annual Integrative Dermatology Symposium to be held at the Coronado Island Marriott in San Diego, California. This program will be 3 days of jam-packed information, including case-based discussions and multiple perspectives on topics such as psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, diet and the skin microbiome, cannabinoids, hair loss, traditional Chinese medicine, and much, much more. Go to www.integrativedermatologysymposium.com and register by July 31st, 2019 to take advantage of our early bird special. We look forward to seeing you there.